Okay, let's go. Welcome back to the season finale of America. What am I going to do today? Probably talk lots of concerns and questions coming out after the 47th president of these here United States has been elected. There's one search in particular that's gone up, apparently like 2,000% on Google Trends. Is denaturalization legal? I fear maybe this is something that we could have probably looked up before we elected the president, but it's okay. We're here now. What I did before I became a criminal defense attorney, right now I'm a full-time criminal defense attorney, but what I did before that was I was an immigration attorney, spent lots and lots of time in ICE, immigration customs enforcement, talking with ICE officers, talking with immigration judges and the prosecutors. Immigration is a federal court, but it's really an administrative court. I'm sorry, are you bored? I'm gonna skip right past that. Is denaturalization legal? Denaturalization is taking away your citizenship when the government snatches your citizenship away. I think a lot of people think that if they secure that citizenship, even if they do it through unlawful means or through lying, it doesn't matter. You're a citizen rather, and the government can't take it away. That is incorrect. The government can snatch away your citizenship, and that normally happens really in rare occasions though. For example, there are all these requirements that you have to satisfy in order to become a United States citizen. There's an N-400 form that you have to fill out with USCIS. Am I getting way too dense with the information here? Long story short, there are these qualifications that you need to satisfy to become a citizen. Whether you have to have lived in the United States for a certain amount of time, you have to be a green card holder for a certain amount of time, you have to have a certain amount of residency requirements. So that means that the amount of time you're in the US and not leaving the US for vacation or things like that, all these things have to be satisfied, and you have to fill out this lengthy application, and it says like, are you a terrorist? All that good stuff. Have you ever been a part of a terrorist organization? And blah, blah, blah. You fill out all that stuff. So if the government later finds out that you lied about something on that application, for example, if you said that you've been in the United States for 5 years or 3 years, whatever, but you've only been in the United States for 1 year, I fear you've lied. And the government might come and try to snatch away your citizenship, because that's really one of the basic statutory requirements, the residency requirement of being a United States citizen. In order to have your citizenship taken away, you need to have willfully misrepresented in a material fact. So that gets confusing. What is willful misrepresentation of a material fact? Okay, so let's do an example. So say you entered the United States on January 1st of 2024, but you really entered the United States on January 3rd of 2024, whatever, or let's do 2020 actually. So January 1st, 2020 is what you put on your application, but you really entered the United States on January 3rd of 2020. Is that going to be material? I don't know, right? Probably not, especially if you satisfy all the other requirements and you just made a mistake. Maybe you looked at your passport incorrectly or whatever. That's a mistake. That's probably just going to be looked at as a mistake. But if you say something else, for example, you lie about, I don't know, being a part of a terrorist organization, your citizenship might be snatched away. So does this all sound kind of arbitrary to you? I mean, welcome to the legal field, right? Get your Xanax and your depression and head out the door with your Juris Doctor degree, whatever it's called. That's the legal field. It is very arbitrary, and it's always going to be up to the court. But I guess you should find some solace, some comfort in knowing that it is rare to have your citizenship taken away, though it happens. But the question is, because this is such an arbitrary kind of rule, right? When is the government going to decide it's material? And there is a wealth of case law. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that there's no case law. There's a lot of case law on this, but do you really want to rely on the government to interpret the case law the way that it should be interpreted? Do you want a case to, for example, go up to the United States Supreme Court? And particularly when I don't know how they feel about immigration. I don't know if they're going to err on the side of what the law is. I hope they would. But as of late, I'm the Constitution, that's cute. It's kind of just a document that I obviously studied and studied a lot in law school. But these days, it seems like you can just do whatever the hell you want, low key, when you're in these positions of power. So that's the question. I think what concerns a lot of people about the current, the administration that's incoming, number 47, the 47th president, is people feel like he's unpredictable and they don't know what he's going to do once he gets into office. And to some extent that can work to the government's advantage. So for example, not the camera moving. So for example, when I was working as an immigration attorney, a lot of people were just like, I'm gonna simply leave the country. It's too stressful. I don't want to wake up every day wondering whether ICE is going to be knocking on my door. We had cases where literally families would be like, we were up in the morning, we were making breakfast as normal, we were about to take our kids to school, and ICE came into our driveway and just snatched, my husband away, or, threw my kids into a van. And that's a really scary way to live. And a lot of people decide that they don't want to live in that kind of unpredictable world. And so they do go back to their country of origin, is what they call it in immigration law. They say country of origin, but the country in which they are a citizen and where they were born. So my theory is that the government, the scarier that they make this for people, the more that people are just going to be like, you know what, I'm just going to leave. I'm done. And that kind of helps the government. Not even kind of, it really helps the government, because then they don't have to spend money on deporting people if people are just kind of self-deporting and leaving on their own. So yes, is denaturalization legal? Yes. If you have your citizenship and you weren't born here, if you got your citizenship through other means, for example, marrying a United States citizen, or if you got it through an O visa, or you got it through some sort of visa through work, then no, it doesn't mean that you're safe. But I do think that for the most part, it's so limited. The circumstances in which your citizenship will be taken away is so limited that most people won't have to worry about that as it stands today. Now, a year from now, will I be making another video and all of this stuff is completely out the window? Maybe, but that's how the law is. It's man-made. Are only criminals going to be deported? So this is essentially, there's this sentiment that people feel like, oh, I'm not going to be deported. I'm an undocumented immigrant, meaning I came into this country without inspection, or I don't have documentation at this point. So I might have DACA, because I came here, I'm a childhood arrival. My parents brought me here when I was really young, and I was 6 months old when I was brought here, so I'm not a citizen, but I've been living in the United States my entire life, blah, blah, blah. I might have DACA, or you don't have any documentation and you are living under the radar, right? A lot of people think that if they don't get in trouble, then they won't be deported, but I want you to think about this. So another example of things I experienced when I was practicing immigration law heavily is you're driving to work, for example, and you get pulled over. If you're in a state like Georgia, you don't get a driver's license when you are an undocumented immigrant. So if you don't have proper paperwork, you don't get a driver's license. It's not like that everywhere. I think in California and New York, you can get a driver's license, but in Georgia, nah, bookie, you can't get one. And so what happens? You get pulled over for driving without a valid license, or you get stopped on the street for something random, like, I don't know, not jaywalking, but whatever, like, small crime that you may have committed, something that would be a traffic ordinance typically, and all of a sudden you are getting deported, you're in ICE custody. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, it's only if you're committing these horrible, murder or these really violent crimes. Those are the people who get deported. Number one, that's not true. But number two, you don't have to commit a crime to get deported. Certainly, right, it's a lot easier for the government to deport you and you're on their radar if you've committed a crime, you're in the jail, you're in the legal system, versus if you're, I guess, living under the radar every day and going to work and coming home. But I don't want anyone to think that the government isn't going to simply start going into workplaces and asking employers for documentation to see if all of their employees are citizens, right? Or going into schools or sanctuary locations, for example, churches. Right now, I think ICE does have a policy where they don't go into churches because that's considered, I guess, a safe space for undocumented immigrants. But that's a policy that ICE has imposed upon themselves. That's not a law, right? What that means is that ICE at any time can be like, no, we're going to start going into churches. We're going to start doing all of these other things. And so again, that's what I was alluding to earlier when I was saying it's concerning for a lot of people, and they feel like they don't want to live under that stress, because immigration very much changes with who's in charge, who's at the top, right? It shifts. Sometimes you have presidents who might be a little more lenient on immigration, allegedly, and you really never know when someone might, an enforcement officer might come and ask you for your papers. Now, do you have rights and privileges because you are in the United States? Yeah, you do have rights and privileges. But immigration, there's a lot of leeway that the ICE officers are going to exercise, I'll put it that way, when they're trying to figure out whether you're documented or undocumented. So it's certainly a scary time. I definitely have friends who had DACA, and I have friends who were undocumented for a long time, and they talked about how it was so scary, how they at any moment didn't know whether they were going to get deported, and they didn't tell people that they were from out of the country because they never knew who was going to snitch. There's an immigration hotline where you can call and you can tell the immigration department whether someone is a citizen or not, or whether you think someone's undocumented. I mean, I do expect an uptick in that. I think that in these first 30, 60, 90 days, we're going to see a lot of people who are going to be deported. I do absolutely think that. What's interesting too is that, sometimes people will cross the border and they'll say that they're from Mexico, for example, but they're not really from Mexico. They might be from like Colombia or Venezuela, wherever, or, Jamaica, whatever, China. But they'll cross the border from Mexico or maybe even from Canada, and they might get deported back to Canada or back to Mexico. But what the United States might do this time is they might say, okay, well, we want to deport you back to your country of origin. I don't know, wherever you're from in the world. Because I think a lot of times too, we think about immigration in terms of only people from Mexico coming to the United States, which I guess I understand why people think that, because that is obviously our neighboring country. And so we do get a lot of immigrants from there, but people immigrate into the United States from all over the world. And so this is not just a Mexico conversation that we're having. Immigrants are from everywhere, from European countries as well. But a lot of times when you're in America and you talk about undocumented immigrants, that's really a term that people are actually, if you really get down to it, they're talking about people from Mexico, which is a whole nother conversation that we can have about how bonkers that is. But that's what people think when they think about immigration. But no, it's not just a Mexico problem. But a lot of times countries will say, well, no, I'm not going to take you. For example, if Mexico says, no, I'm not taking this person back, then what the United States might do is try to talk to other countries and try to send people to other countries that they're not from. I mean, it's always sad when you have someone who immigrated to this country. Say that you immigrate here, your parents bring you here when you're 7 years old. You don't know anything about where you came from. You don't really know anything about Mexico. You've never been to Mexico. You have never left the United States, but you get dropped back off in Mexico when you get deported when you are 35, for example. And what are you supposed to do? You might not even speak Spanish, right? So that's the reality. I could talk about this all day long, but I guess the gist of it is, yes, denaturalization is legal. And number two, are only criminals going to get deported? No, I think anyone who's undocumented is at risk of being deported. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more videos.